Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll learn about the old orphan trains. But first, joining me now is Stephen Tiedemann, Fargo South teacher and author, I should say. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
First, as we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background, where you're originally from.
I'm originally from Bismarck, North Dakota. I moved to Fargo about 14 years ago to finish my schooling at NDSU. I graduated there with a teacher's license and immediately got hired to teach at Fargo Public School, where I've been there for the past 12 years teaching 9th and 10th grade English.
Well, with that, tell us about teaching 9th and 10th grade English.
Well, there isn't a day that's the same, that's for sure. There's always something new with the students. The 9th graders can be quite chatty and energetic, and that usually carries over to 10th grade as well.
Let's move now to your literary life. I understand you're self-published as Kindle editions on Amazon. Can you explain what that's about and what is that?
What it is ebooks, and since it's on Amazon, they have their own little selection of the Kindles, and it's only available on the Kindles, which I kind of have found with some people kind of irritating, because if they want to read it and they don't have a Kindle or the Kindle app, they can't. But the overall process is not that hard to go by at all, because they kind of lead you through it step by step online through their site. All you have to do is log in, get an account, and you're all set.
Mm-hmm. Was that hard to do? Can you explain?
No, it actually wasn't, because if you get the Kindle app, they have actually a free download book, which takes you step by step how to format the printing, how the heading for the chapters and all that, where to put it, and then they take you through just little prearranged boxes that you type in and get everything set up for title and how much you want to charge for it, all that kind of thing.
Well, I understand one of your students or former students actually told you about that it was easy to get self-published. Is that true? And tell us about that.
Yeah, he sent me an email. It was about 2 years ago now, actually, and he said he wanted me, if I had time to check out his book. It's on Amazon, and I was like, really? Wow. So I went on there, looked at it, I'm like, okay. Then I sent an email back, said, how'd you do this? And he kind of explained, go to this site there and all that. So I was like, okay, because I was kind of looking for a way to get my works out there, because sending them to editors and whatnot wasn't working very well. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go through this route, and I actually have quite enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about your first book, Duran's Love. What's it about?
That one is about a young man. He's 16 years old. He's a blacksmith apprentice, and he lives in this world, or this country called Impol, who's kind of ruled by an evil dictator. And that really doesn't bother him too much until he gets kind of swept into things, because he falls in love with this girl, and she kind of ends up dying, so he decides to take it on his own and get revenge. And so he ends up going along with a good friend of his, and by the end of the book, he learns some surprising things about not only himself, but the person he was in love with.
Now, would you consider this a short book, short novel? What do you consider?
It's a novel. It's about 350 pages long.
Okay.
Yep. And it's considered a fantasy novel.
Okay. And then you followed it up with The Walking Shadow. Can you tell us a little about this one? And I think it's a little different. Oh,
it's a lot different. It's in the crime drama genre, so a lot different from the fantasy one. The Walking Shadow takes place here in Fargo during the winter, because, it's Fargo. And it's set around the detective John Schwartz, who is coming back from bereavement leave. He just lost his wife to breast cancer. They had 2 children together, so he's kind of juggling his job and being a single father. He comes back, he works in the Crime Against Children unit at Fargo Police Department. And they kind of give him a case of, they thought this kid was just kind of not coming home for a day or so. They thought it would be an easy case to give him. Here it turns out into a serial killer case. So the FBI is called in, and he has to work with someone from there as well. It kind of snowballs from there.
Well, then, how have, I assume, is ebook, but how have sales been going so far?
Sales have been, slow. In the ebook world, it's tough to get it out there. They have certain promotions you can do, and one of them is you can have your book free for a couple days or so. So I did that one, And I was quite surprised when, I think moved, I can't say sold because I didn't, but I moved like 700 units.
Oh, wow.
And by the end of the second day, they have little rankings for the section you're at, and I was number 9 in the top crime drama thing for free books anyway.
Mm-hmm. Interesting with that. Well, then, were you able to get feedback from some of these individuals?
You can get, they can leave comments on there. I've had 6 of them left so far, and 5 of them have been positive. One of them hasn't, and I kind of looked at it and I was like, I don't think it's kind of fair what he said, but oh well.
Well, okay. Well, but as a writer, you have to take all criticism, I guess.
Yep.
Well, why don't you read a passage, I guess, from Duran's Love first?
Okay.
Let's hear a little bit about that.
This is the actually opening of the prologue. So, fall's cold, wet rain fell as a lone form stood watching the panic-stricken man run into the tall grass. Victor Prawn sheathed his sword and watched the man disappear. Although there was cover in the grass, the man's flight was futile. There was no place to run in the tall vegetation. The man could stay hidden, but Prawn was a patient person. The tall grass was out in the open, and Prawn had a good view of most of its edges. There was only one part that was out of his view. That would be the section Prawn's quarry would attempt to escape from. Prawn's boots splashed the water that had collected on the ground as he walked around the marsh's edge. The wild grass stretched into a slough that turned into a small stream. As much as he hated wading in the rain, he had no choice. Prawn's heavy clothing was wet, but it hadn't soaked through yet. The extreme price he paid for the clothing was worse staying dry in the cold rain. It wasn't the thought of the dampening clothing that was bothering Prawn. It was the joints in his hands. Every time it rained, his hands throbbed. It started within the last 2 years and gotten worse. He was no longer a young man. His joints were pointing that out. Raindrops pelted the top of his brimmed hat, but he was barely heard them as he went back concentrating on the tall grass. Occasionally the wind would blow the grass, but his reflexes would stay down. As he waited, he thought about the man he had chased for 2 days and was close to catching. The man was a small fish, nothing major really. The bounty on him was rather tiny, but it wasn't the man's head Prawn was after. What he wanted was inside the man's head. With that information, Prawn could be able to go after a greater bounty.
Now, this was considered a fantasy drama,
Yes.
you called it. Now, how long ago did you write this?
This one I wrote when I was 25. It started out as a 90-page novella, and then the more I kind of thought about it, looked at it, I realized I could expand it by adding more to the plot and more characters that worked well with the main character, Duran.
So, did you finish it as a novella, you said, and then expanded it?
Yes.
So, how was that difficult, or did you just take the small one and just blossom?
I took the small one and went with it on that.
All right, but then you sort of changed in your next book, The Walking Shadow. Why did you change?
I tend to like to write stuff that kind of, I get the interesting idea in my head and it sits there for a while, and I let it sit there for some more time, and then if it keeps really just kind of not going away, I'm going to look into working on it. And the idea with the Fargo one stuck in there for enough that I wanted to write it, even though it wasn't like my first novel.
All right, well then, if you will, read us a passage from The Walking Shadow.
Okay, in this section, John, the main character, is going to Fargo South to talk about the SRO, about the missing student. After lunch and a stop back at the department, John found himself going to South High, even after his partner Amy had called Bruce Gerholt that morning. Every high school and middle school in the area had a police officer stationed there. Those officers were also responsible for surrounding grade schools, but spent most of their time at the high schools and middle schools. The school resource officer, or SRO, was responsible for many areas, including running lockdown drills, looking to major discipline problems at the request of the principal. Bruce had been South High's SRO for 3 years and knew the school quite well. John had talked with Bruce on several occasions and even gotten flowers sent from him to Melissa's funeral. Bruce would be the first person he talked to when he arrived at school. John had already called the SRO to tell him he was coming. John wondered if he would see his daughter there, and if she knew Logan. It wasn't that big of a school, so the odds were in favor of Christina knowing him. Just how well was the question. John was going solo for this trip. He asked Amy to stay behind at the department and make some calls at some places in Fargo where Logan might have gone, such as the YMCA. It was a small chance he was at any of the places Amy was calling, but it was worth a shot. It was 1 o'clock when John pulled into the north parking lot of the school. The lot was full of vehicles in various states of abuse and years. John parked the department's unmarked car in a spot next to the least dented car and got out. The cold air hit him again, and he wondered if Logan was out in it.
So again, being that you've written about Fargo and even Fargo South, where you teach. What's been the reaction to that so far?
All my students know about it because of the article that was in the Fargo Forum in February, and a couple have read the book. And it's kind of on the darker side with the subject matter that so I wouldn't exactly suggest it, and I don't promote it among my students.
Okay.
But you can't a lot of times you can't stop them because they get interested, and they liked it.
Okay.
They said it was a little darker, but.
Well, with that said, have you always been interested in writing, or did you develop that?
Ever since I was in grade school, I wanted to be a writer. And that's actually what I went into school first, was just a regular English degree, and I went to Mankato State in Minnesota. And then I kind of got disoriented with writing at Mankato State, and I came back to Bismarck, worked for a while, and I still really enjoyed English. And I enjoyed I'm talking to people about it, and also helping people where I was working at, kind of training them. And I thought, a teacher might be a good fit for me, and it has been. So I'm still at it for 12 years. So.
Yeah. Well, with that said, because these are ebooks, as you mentioned, but have you ever thought about now self-publishing in print?
I actually kind of have been looking into it. I've been talking with a former 6th grade teacher of mine, Kevin Kramer. He now lives in Florida. And he calls himself down there the Dr. Book. And he kind of takes books, edits them, kind of goes through that, looks for ways to see if, for publishing and all that. Because I've kind of been talking with him on that. Because my next one I'm working on now, I'm seriously considering having that one self-published.
Well, when you said even at a young age, you were interested in writing. What writers or influences did you have?
When I was young, I read anything I could get my hands on, anything that was fiction anyway. And then when I went to high school, I discovered Stephen King. And I've read everything Stephen King has written up to this point. And then I've gotten in after high school and college, I got more into the classics. Jack London. Martin Eden, Jack London's Martin Eden is my favorite novel by far. And then Ernest Hemingway, John Steinbeck. And right now I'm kind of into the Michael Connelly. He's the one that writes the detective novels and court novels, so a lot of those I'll read as well.
With that said, I mean, because there seems to be just almost a logjam of books. With self-publishing being easier than I guess publishing was in, what I'd consider the old days, but the old days is different for everybody. But it just seems like there's a lot of books out there, and it's hard to get that breakthrough to be sort of noticed and recognized and read and bought, I guess. Do you see that?
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, even a few years ago, it wasn't as big as it is now, because with the way Amazon has made it easier to self-publish an ebook, it has really exploded, and there are literally thousands, if not more, self-published books out there. So getting one to break through is very difficult. You have to almost spend a lot of time promoting it and that kind of thing. And that's kind of right now, it's kind of a hobby of mine.
Okay. Well, yeah, we may talk about that more because, yeah, it's a hobby, but yeah, how to write, because there are great writers, I assume, out there that are probably undiscovered. But, our students today, you're teaching 9th and 10th grade English. With the technology we've got, are students still good writers? Are people writing a lot?
Oh, they're writing a lot because, with the curriculum we have at Fargo South, it's expected. In every class, they're expected to do some kind of form of writing. And with the new Common Core coming up, you got it kind of shaping toward more nonfiction, critical thinking kind of writing on that. But I've known many students that come up to me and say, hey, I'm kind of writing a book myself, and they'll talk about it and all that. So, they've been pretty open with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, what advice then do you have for young writers out there?
I usually tell them to keep reading. And if something, if they're writing something and it just doesn't work, just don't get frustrated and keep at it.
But for me, writing's hard. And I know for a lot of people it is, and for some people it comes easy, maybe because of the way they came up. But so how is it for you? Is it hard? You hear writer's block. So what is it like for writing?
It depends on the subject matter for me. I mean, in college, I had to write all those, papers on teaching and all that, and sometimes it's just, writer's block is huge there. If I'm interested in something, I definitely can, keep at it. Case in point was I was working on this one story. I was about 67 pages into it, but for some reason it was hard to write. every day I worked on it, felt like pulling teeth. So I kind of like, I'm just going to step aside, step away from it. Maybe it'll get better. But the one I'm working on now, I can, there's some days when I have time, I can get 13 pages a day done at it because I'm really interested in it. I'm interested in the characters in it. So it comes easy for me as long as I'm interested in the idea.
Well, I just heard you say that, 13 pages. I was probably going to ask you, what in a good day, when you say day though, I mean, you sit down and can you do 10 pages in an hour, or is that 10 hours?
Usually, like in the summer, that's when I really can write because I don't teach summer school anymore. And right after lunch, my kids have been fed and they can go outside and play. So I have about an hour or so to myself. And about in 2 hours, I can get probably 8 pages done if I really kind of am focused on it.
But I also heard you saying writing about a subject that you know. And because I've been told that by numerous people who write, they say, write about things you know. And that helps sometimes in the writing process.
It does, especially a lot of my characters. Well, I'll admit there are little bits parts of me in them, just because I obviously know me. So I'm going to write their personality is going to be similar to mine. And like in the Walking Shadow novel, obviously I've never been a detective, but there is a character in the book that is a teacher. He's a minor character, but he does appear. And I had one of my students read it. She goes, "That's you, isn't it?" And I'm like, kind of.
Well. There's nothing wrong with that. You mentioned that you were working on something new, I guess. So what are you working on?
I'm working on, well, I guess you could call it kind of a drama, I guess. It's not a crime drama or anything. It's about a 17-year-old young man. He kind of has a mild form of autism, and his grandfather, who's in a nursing home, he has Alzheimer's. And the grandfather wants to go to the Rocky Mountains one more time before he completely forgets everything, because that's where he spent his honeymoon, in there. Well, the young man, Gavin's dad, doesn't have time to take him. So Gavin decides to take it upon himself to take his grandfather there. Only problem is he can't drive. So he has to enlist his friend, who's kind of a high school dropout, to help him. And so they take this way out of the way thing, thinking that'll throw off their, the father. And right now I have them in Sturgis during the bike rally.
Mm-hmm. And when do you think you might complete that and that be out?
Oh, I have a feeling that probably in the next 2 weeks I'm going to get it done written. Then I have to go back and revise it, and there's some things I need to add in there to make it completely work the way I want it to.
Well, sure. Now, would you e-publish that one first, or what are your thoughts?
That one I'm not sure on. This one I really feel that I could do something great with, because I really enjoy the storyline on it. So that one I might look into just self-publishing. I got to look into the cost of that. And what's kind of nice is my brother, he's a graphic designer up in Minot, and his firm that he works at does this kind of thing. So I have at least an out or an in there, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, one thing I guess we didn't talk about, because the Amazon e-reader, you said you have to have a Kindle.
mm-hmm.
Once you publish it that way, are you then restricted from self-publishing for a period of time, or are there restrictions?
There's minor restrictions. I have to look closely at it if I want it with The Walking Shadow and Duran's Love.
Mm-hmm.
But there's minor restrictions, but they're not as bad as one would think. You can kind of self-publish on that.
Okay.
So.
Well, it'll be interesting then, and I look forward to hear how your next one, when you get it out, how it does. Well, but if people want more information to find your books, where can they go? Who can they contact?
They can go online, go on the Amazon site if they want, then type in my name, Stephen Tiedemann, and they'll find the 2 books I have on there right now.
Okay, and we'll look forward to seeing your 3rd book out in one form or another coming soon.
Thank you.
Well, Steve, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned for more. In the 1800s, the railroads faced a problem. Farm labor shortages along their newly expanded westward lines threatened profitability. Not surprisingly, in 1853, they jumped at a chance to support a New York City minister's idea, an early version of foster care that would find homes for the city's orphans on farms in the Midwest. Until the program ended in 1929, more than 250,000 abandoned, homeless, and orphaned children were taken from the streets, tenements, and orphanages of New York City and sent to uncertain futures with strangers.
They were told, your parents are not your parents, your past is not your past, your life begins when you are chosen. The orphan trains began because a Methodist minister in New York City named Charles Loring Brace looked around the streets of New York and saw that there were 30,000 children living on the streets. They were getting run over, dying of starvation and exposure, going to jail, becoming criminals, they were becoming prostitutes. What we think of as Dickensian London is really what it was like then for poor people. Immigrants were pouring in, the Industrial Revolution was replacing jobs for poor people with machines. The Civil War was raging and creating vulnerable war widows. So there are many reasons that there were all these children on the streets. And Brace had this idea, it was sort of a glorified fresh air fund. He thought, if I can get children off the streets and send them to farms in the Midwest where labor is needed, maybe we can save their lives and maybe we can clean up the streets of New York. He worked with the train companies to send children on trains to the Midwest, and the trains each held between 10 and 30 children. And over the course of the next 75 years, over 250,000 children were sent to the Midwest. There were two ways that people got children from the orphan trains. The Foundling Hospital, which got into the act a little bit later, would put notices in newspapers around the Midwest, and people would write in and say, I'd like a blonde, curly-haired, blue-eyed, 7-year-old boy with a sweet disposition. And so they would look around and find that child and put him on a train, and then that person would be waiting on the other end. The Children's Aid Society had the children line up by height at a train platform or at a city hall or a Grange hall. Then farmers or whoever came would often, not unlike a slave auction, have them run in place, check their teeth, check their muscles, have them do even sit-ups or push-ups to make sure they were strong because they wanted workers. The farmers would take them off the stage and then fill out certificates taking ownership of the child. Contracts were signed between the people who took the train riders in and the organization, the Children's Aid Society or the Foundling Hospital, and it says, shall be indentured until the age of 21. These children were 2 to 14 years old. 21 is quite a long time to be working for someone else. The people who took in the train riders were required to send them to school, 4 months of schooling a year, to feed and clothe them. There was some language about treating them as you would one of your own. However, they were labor. For some of them, it was actually a form of slavery. Many of them had no choice but do what they were told to do. There were volunteers in communities who were supposed to check in on the children. That was rather spotty as a process. For one thing, they were volunteers. And because children were property, even if someone went out to check on a situation, it was much more likely that the adults would be believed than that the child would be believed. Furthermore, there was a great disincentive to take children out of homes because it was so hard then to know what to do with them. And so they would often leave children in situations that were not really the best for them. It was an imperfect system, and what it meant is that it was absolutely a roulette wheel. And the children had no choice about where they were going, and the people who took in the train riders were as varied as human nature. There were very good people, very kind people who took in train riders, and there were also people who weren't so good and kind. Even if the people who took them in were kind, they often treated them as a little bit less than family. One of the reasons we don't know much, that most people don't know much about the orphan trains, is that the train riders themselves didn't realize that they were part of this large movement. 250,000 children go on these trains, and most of them think that their train was the only one that went. So you can see why they didn't organize more quickly or reach out to each other. I was so lucky. When I began this book, there were 150 living train riders. Today, there are probably between 10 and 20. It was such a gift. I had access to living train riders and could interview them. One of the most significant was a woman named Pat Thiessen. Even at the age of 93, she felt the loss and the sort of sorrow. She said they were good people, but they were not my people. As one train rider said to me, you know, we had been through so much turmoil and so much trauma. Every child who rode the orphan train had been through something terrible. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been there because the trains were the last resort.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funding for Minnesota Legacy programs are provided by a grant from the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, and by the members of Prairie Public.